All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our advisory council today. I know it being June, we may have a few missing because they are already on vacation or they potentially have a work day that they are in a meeting or something. So I think we have some more that'll jump in as we go for the next little bit. But like I said, I appreciate you all being here today. And I know we have a lot of guests with us today, which is exciting. So, just to start us off, it being the end of the school year, um, I know all of my school counselors, I mean, you have survived another year of just unknowns and just crazy and just unexpected things that have happened. And so, I just want to celebrate you all today that you've made it through another year and that hopefully moving into next year, I know a lot of you that I've talked to or that we've done trainings or coaching, I know are hoping to look at trying to get back to some more proactive approaches like we used to do. But I would love to hear just one celebration or one success that you have had this year, just to start us off on a positive note this afternoon. So if anybody wants to unmute and just share a celebration or a success that you had this year.
Hello, this is Travis Kernbergen. I'll give it a shot. Am I coming out there? Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you, Travis.
Okay. So this grant fell in my lap this year, which was to shepherd fifth graders as they built an electric car, which I thought was really cool, and it fit well within the academic domain in that our fifth grade didn't have science this year, and so our GT coordinator was like, if you can head this up, this would be cool and it would fit well. And so I've been like overseeing these fifth graders really grow, and like from learning what a socket wrench is to building this electric car, and then we're going to race it this weekend at UK. But it's really been a highlight of my year. In a very trying year, it's been something that's made a lot of kids smile, made me smile. So that's been a kind of a neat thing.
A very unique experience, absolutely, Travis. And I'm sure you really got to see how they do team building and working together in that project. So able to bring your counselor skills. So that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. Okay. Anybody else, a success or a celebration you'd like to share with us today from the whole school year?
We brought back our college and career readiness week and our career fair, which is a huge favorite among our students. We had 2 years off due to COVID, and Heather, thank you so much for coming. And it was it's a great event. It's a lot of work, but the kids absolutely loved it, and it just makes it all worth it.
Yeah. Well, I can say from my experience there, Kate, I know I've already reached out to some people that needed some college and career information to contact you because I know your week and how you advertised it. And I know the day we were there, getting to participate and see the kids was very fun and it was exciting. So I mean, you could tell they enjoyed it. They were so interested and they just behaved like so well, like from kindergarten all the way up. They were amazing. Yeah, it was awesome. Okay. Anybody else?
Kind of along the same lines as Kate is just being able to do celebrations with kids again. So with our PBIS, we took a skating rink trip earlier this spring, and then just a couple weeks ago, we ended the year with a trip to our local splash park. So being able to do really fun things with the students who have had great behavior, and just to reward and to recognize their efforts after especially an extremely trying time. So that was really fun to be able to do those again.
Yeah, I'm sure they enjoyed that. A little bit of normalcy. Yeah, great. Okay, anybody else? We'll take one or two more. Okay. Okay, so I know Sarah Aiken is our expert. She takes our notes and she's amazing. And so if you wouldn't care, Sarah, do you want to go ahead and we'll do our attendance and then we'll get into our guests that we have today?
Sure, absolutely. I'm going to pull up our attendance list. When I pull that up, I won't unfortunately be able to see your faces. So if you'll just unmute and just let me know that you're here, I'd appreciate that. And also, I will apologize in advance if I mispronounce your name, but please correct me. That way I can get it correct in the future. Elizabeth Barnett, Kate.
I'm here.
Okay. Calvin Brooks. Susan Brown. Tammy Cole. Strazi Collins. Camilla. Or Camille.
I'm here.
Great. Dr. Dye. Dr. Fields. Beth Duvall Fleming.
Here.
Great. Malia Gibson. Okay. Travis Kern.
Here.
Great. Carla McCarty. Whitney P. Amy Pike.
I'm here.
Great. Stacy Russell.
I'm here.
Okay. Is it Karen or Corinne?
It's Corinne.
Corinne. Okay. I have a family friend that's spelled just that way, but she's a K instead of a C. So I wanted to make sure. Thank you. All right. Amber Schmidt. And Tammy White. Okay. And welcome to all of our guests as well. Thank you so much for being here today. All right, Heather.
All right, thank you, Sarah. Okay, so like I said, we have some special guests today that I am beyond excited to get to have in our advisory council. I was able to attend the Student Advisory Council a couple of days ago and actually get to meet some of these members in person, and I was beyond impressed. And so I was very humbled and very honored to be able to be a part of their meeting. And I reached out to Heather Deering, who of course is in Lieutenant Governor's office, because I know they have a lot of great initiatives that they are working on that truly involve us as school counselors. And so I just wanted to invite them here today just to kind of just go over with you all their initiatives and just to hear their student voices. And then you all can ask questions, and I really want to see how we can collaborate moving forward, because like I said, all of their initiatives include school counseling in some way. And so we want to make sure that we are collaborating with them, since especially because it's all based on our student voices from around the state. So Heather, do you want to introduce who all got to join us today? I see several of them in here.
Yeah. Hi. Yes, I would love to. And Heather, also, is it possible that I could share a presentation?
Yes, if you see if you have rights to share, and if not, that if you want to email it to me really quickly or put it in the chat, then I can share it. So, oh, perfect.
Okay, good. So again,
Yes.
just like Sarah said, as soon as I share, I can no longer see everyone. So I'm sorry if I miss any visual cues that you're sending me, but I'm super excited to be here today. My name is Heather Deering. I work for the Lieutenant Governor, Jacqueline Coleman, who has led a student mental health initiative over the past 9 or 10 months or so, but I'm more excited to get to introduce to you some of the students that I'm here with. And some of you all have probably heard them present before. So I'm going to just name them off and hope that they'll wave when I do so. And then they'll be actually doing some of this presentation here momentarily. But we have with us today all graduated seniors. So these are amazing students who are going on to do even more amazing things. We have Soleila Elliott Gonzalez, who graduated from Ballard High School in Jefferson County. We have Sam Smith from Davis County. We have Rox Lockard, who graduated from the Craft Academy, but is a native of Scott County. And then we also have Soliana Mespin, who graduated from Eastern High School and who is the outgoing student member of the Kentucky Board of Education. So I'm really excited that they're all here today. And all of these students are members of the Kentucky Department of Education Commissioner's Student Advisory Council. So the mirror, I guess, a complementary advisory council to this body as well. And we engaged with them in this project over the last several months. And I'm excited to tell you about it. I'm going to go really quickly because I ultimately want to hand it over to the students so you can hear where we are today. And I know many of you have seen this presentation before, so I am going to go pretty quickly, but I will share the slide deck with Heather and she can share it out with you all in case I go too fast. So in the fall of last year, or in the fall of 2020, the Lieutenant Governor, as an educator and as the Lieutenant Governor, as a member of the Board of Education, was really thinking about students going back to school and what that would look like. Some of them were going back in person, some of them were going back hybrid post-COVID. And what we knew about mental health before COVID was that 1 in 5 students across the country had a mental disorder, but only 20% of those students were receiving care from a specialized mental health provider. This was validated in the Kentucky Youth Risk Behavior Survey in 2018, and then a report called Youth Mental Health Matters that was published in 2018. Just continue to reinforce that student mental health was a challenge kind of even before the pandemic. And then during the pandemic, the Student Voice team conducted a Coping with COVID study, which was a student-driven study that identified and again kind of validated and reinforced that students were struggling during the pandemic with mental health, depression, anxiety, and just general kind of challenges going through school during the middle of the pandemic. And I think we can all kind of identify with that and having experienced that directly personally or with the students that we worked with. So as I mentioned, the Lieutenant Governor was really thinking a lot about students returning to school and really wanted to hear directly from students about kind of their current situation with mental health, and wanted to talk directly to them about that. And it was kind of an opportune time as well in the fall. Not only were students going back to school, but mental health was becoming an issue that was becoming more commonly talked about, partially through things like Simone Biles talking about her experiences during the Olympics, for example. So because the Lieutenant Governor is a member of the Board of Education and knew that the Student Advisory Council would be a good resource for this, she pitched this idea of having student conversations across the Commonwealth to the Student Advisory Council, asked for volunteers, and we had 14 or so students from the council agree to help us on this adventure. And this was in addition to their existing commitments, right? So already busy students, already doing things in their local communities, already serving as members of the Student Advisory Council, and then volunteered to take on this extra work and work with us to plan these events. So we engaged them right away, and I realize that I'm behind on the slides, sorry. So we engaged the members of the Advisory Council. We partnered with our regional educational cooperatives. I know many of you all are here on that call as well. We also worked with the Department for Behavioral Health at the Cabinet for Health and Family Services, and we worked with the statewide division of Family Youth Resource Service Centers, the Frisky division, also at CHFS. While we started planning these conversations that we wanted to have with students, which we will talk more about in just a minute, that we called action summits, at the same time we were doing this and having these events, there was some other stuff happening at the federal level, and you all might be aware of this, so I'll just briefly reference this slide and show you that in October, there was a kind of a coordinated effort to publish from the White House, the Department of Education, and the American Academy of Pediatrics reports, white papers, documents about kind of the growing crisis of mental health in children and in students. And then on the heels of that, in December, the U.S. Surgeon General released an advisory report called Protecting Youth Mental Health. And so we were kind of already ahead of these in some ways because we were talking directly to students, but we felt significantly validated when these reports came out. And I mention these because they're going to come to play as we get further along when we talk about the students' recommendations. So we worked with, before I hand it over to our students, I just want to say, so we worked with the students that you're going to hear from and the others in planning these events that we wanted to have. We wanted their endorsement or decision-making power at as many levels as possible. And I feel really confident that these events were as successful as they were because of their participation from the very beginning. And so I'm actually going to hand this over to the students now to talk about the events we held in the fall, the work we did since those events, and then the recommendations that they've developed. So I'm handing that over to, I think, either Soleila or Rox. I can't remember.
You're handing it over to me.
Okay, there you go.
But hi, everyone. I'm Rox. As Heather said, I graduated from the Craft Academy recently, and I will be continuing my journey at Morehead State. So as you can see in this photo, we held 10 events all across the state that were in partnership with the regional educational cooperatives. Attendance really was largely regional due to convenience, but we did host one virtual statewide event for all students that were interested in participating across the Commonwealth. Usually in each one of our regional events, we would name drop this online event so they could bring it home to their families or their friends or teachers or anyone else who wanted to attend. Due to COVID surges in some cases, we did have to move some of the regional events online just for safe and healthy reasons. This was done when absolutely necessary, but we did leave that up to the regions for their own personal decisions as much as possible so that they could decide. Next slide, please. So out of our 10 events held, there were 7 in person and 3 virtual, which was amazing. We really wanted to be in person to connect with the students as much as possible. The virtual ones were held over Zoom. And we had an online registration process for students to sign up for attending. It wasn't required, but it was recommended so that we could get a sort of demographic and number estimate. So using our online numbers, again, these are not entirely accurate, but they're as close as we could get. We had about 375 students that registered. At the events, we did not have a sign-in process or a check-in process, again, because we did want to protect student identity and make it anonymous. But based on head counts, we had about 300 students attend out of our projected numbers, which was a really amazing turnout that we were able to see. And through all 10 events, we hosted about 25 small breakout sessions, which was an amazing number. And the next slide, we'll talk about that a little bit more. So at every event, whether it was in person or virtual, it would begin with a welcome from the Lieutenant Governor, Jacqueline Coleman. And then one of the student advisors from our group would follow her up with a bit more information before we really started the small group sessions. So we would share some mental health data. We would talk about why we were there. Some would share personal experiences with mental health in the schooling system and in COVID, just to, you know, introduce ourselves to the students and get them to really grasp our point at that time. So then after that, we would send the students into their breakout sessions. Usually about 5 to 15 students were in each group, and just to keep it small and low pressure, before we did send them off into their little groups, we would introduce the local mental health clinician that was in attendance. So this was offered because we wanted to make sure that students had a proper sort of safety net if they needed it, because some of these topics that were discussed could be incredibly difficult. And we really did want to make sure that all students were safe and we were prepared in every way for them. And we never did have any instance where a student needed to use a clinician, which was amazing, but it was really reassuring to have them there. So in each breakout session, it was facilitated by a student. Typically, it was from the KDE Student Council, so it was one of us, but sometimes it was a local student who was trained in emotional training and facilitation. And then there was one adult in the room who would play the role of a scribe, a timekeeper, and a monitor, just to make sure everything was running smoothly and be able to take anonymous notes on the data we were pulling. So after introductions and an icebreaker with the students, we would guide them through a series of questions about student mental health. And this sort of questioning and open discussion lasted about an hour in each group. And there was 4 main questions that we asked and then 2 additional ones. So I will be passing it on to Soleila to talk about the questions we asked and the sort of responses we heard.
Hi guys, I'm Soleila. I live in Louisville, Kentucky, and I was told to keep this brief, so I'm going to keep it brief. But if you guys have any questions, we welcome them afterwards. So throughout this event, as Rots mentioned, we got to ask or conduct these empathy interviews, which allowed us to be able to offer open-ended questions. And so we had 4 main open-ended questions, which are the ones highlighted in blue. And I'm going to let you guys read them for yourselves just to save time and whatnot. But with our first question, we were able to see sort of an overview of the students' mental status, if that made sense, or mental state. And so we had a variety of things. And the big thing that we recognized was that circumstances are different for every student. But a lot of the major themes that we took away from that was that a lot of the extracurricular and non-academic activities were things that were really helpful for them. So we saw positive and negative responses, or ways that their mental health was affected positively and negatively. But on top of that, keep in mind this was last fall. So for many of us, this was coming back from a virtual learning experience for the entirety of the year, the majority of it. And so we also saw instances where students felt that virtual learning was challenging and it left them unmotivated. And then there was because of the limited structure, it was also difficult to socialize and especially transition back to in-person. In our second question, we got to get more into the more specific responses regarding mainly the ways that COVID or the pandemic has affected their lives and their mental health. And so, as Heather mentioned earlier, there were a lot of instances where students felt anxious and overwhelmed, experienced depression, lots of low motivation, and sort of almost a sense of a lack of accountability because of the change in setting. On top of that, there were some more severe responses, such as eating disorders that may or may not be pandemic specific, but overall, students really experienced and expressed a feeling of being isolated and lonely. In the third question, this is where we got to ask sort of more of like, what do students long for? And so we had a variety of responses, but one of the major themes that we saw was that students often just didn't know where to get help or how to get it. And so from there, we realized that a lot of the students were just seeking space and opportunities to have a break from school. And that could be even in the middle of the school day, but it's something that a lot of the students expressed a need for. On top of that, some students also mentioned that trainings for teachers and students could hopefully be updated so that they could stay more recent. There have been a lot of instances, especially in the group of my peers and that have been presenting these presentations. They have also experienced times where the resources that we have are not up to date. at our schools. And on top of that, sometimes it's really helpful for it, or it's been mentioned that it's helpful for students to be able to just have peer resources. So possibly students that they could talk to that have been trained in some ways, which you'll get to hear more about later. And then for our last question, this is really where we were excited. We asked mainly, what are some of the recommendations that we would have for policymakers? And there was a variety of responses that helped us really be able to create our common themes for all of our recommendations. And since we're going to get into them more, I'll just go through them briefly. But the first thing that we noticed was that students overall were just maxed out, whether that was because they didn't have a lot of non-academic breaks, or it was just really difficult to find flexibility within their assignments and homework and home life. But overall, there were students that recommended mental health days, being able to eventually and gradually reduce the stigma for mental health challenges, create greater access to mental health clinicians at schools, update the suicide prevention trainings, which you'll get to hear about later on, and then offer training for school staff and students, as well as mandatory classes and workshops, which is one of my personal favorites. So that is a handful of information, but we will definitely gladly answer questions later on. But moving on to the next slide, what did we do with this data? We got to get together, and afterwards we used all the data that the scribes provided and were able to keep track of, and we pretty much extracted and captured the major themes that occurred throughout all of the responses that we received. And so after the students were able to go back and break down the frequency of responses based on the themes that they had, the student advisors and the lieutenant governor got to review the data together. And eventually, over time, over several months, we got to develop the language for recommendations that we've made, and then create rationale on that as well. So in the end, we got to present it to the lieutenant governor, share it with some of our early partners, and now we get to share it with you guys. So let's get on to the recommendations. I think I'm passing it on to Sam.
Yep. Hello, my name's Sam from Davis County. Our recommendations start with including and elevating student voice. What we mean by this is we want student voice in everywhere where decisions are being made for the school. So having students on site-based, having students on like regional boards of education, and we already have a commissioner's student advisory council and a board member, or student board member for the state board of education. We also would like to enhance school culture and climate. So offering regular activities and resources to encourage healthy and positive relationships between students, staff, counselors, and teachers, and also gender inclusivity. Recognize and respect students' preferred pronouns and use gender inclusive language in schools. I believe I'm passing it on to someone else. I do not know who.
It's me. Sorry, I forgot. Okay, so moving on to our next one, we are really happy to be able to share with you guys that at the beginning of this month, we got to have a ceremonial signing with the lieutenant governor and the governor to be able to sign off House Bill 44, which I'm sure most of you guys are aware of. But ironically, this is something that we were in the process of being able to push for as this was happening. So on one of our recommendations, we are hoping to be able to allow students 6 excused mental health days per school. And we can explain sort of like the gist of it, but for the most part, we collectively, the students came together and tried to see for ourselves and for our peers what would be a good number for us, or based on our experiences, and that's how we got 6. But then on to the next one. Our hope is to be able to allocate or create mental health services and treatment that are more available to students throughout the school year. So part of it is allocating funding to licensed mental health professionals on all school campuses, all from grades K through 12. And there have been several states that have also gone through this process and have partnered with Frisky, or have gotten to work with other organizations to be able to make sure that there's enough mental health professionals to be able to cover all bases for schools. On top of that, one of the peer mentor ideas we had was being able to train students, a group of selected students, to be able to have a sort of younger mentee that they can be able to work with through sort of day-to-day life problems or any concerns they have. And we recognize that this is not going to be a professional experience, but sometimes we also know that it's so much easier to be able to communicate and feel comfortable with their peers. So just through a trained experience, we're hoping that this could be another thing that would benefit our students. And then on to the next slide, we have being able to increase mental health awareness and education. So the big goal overall is being able to try to reduce the stigma that is associated with mental health problems and or any type of negative connotation that comes along with that. And one of the things that we've seen in that is that there have been, even beyond students and beyond staff members at schools, we also see it in our families. So our hope is to be able to eventually provide workshops in some ways for students to be able to have discussions within school, but also outside of school, and carry it over to family members so that families who could also become equally as informed and practice similar mental health interventions. And then for being able to improve our professional development, we have seen a lot of PDs in the last couple of years that are required, but our hope is that we can be able to make sure that teachers and all staff are more informed on how to address and recognize early signs of ACEs or any mental health problems or events that could be conflicting for students. And so through this, our hope is for the staff to be able to just become more aware, and whether it's the front office staff, janitorial staff, or just maintenance in general. And then our last part is being able to use evidence-based curriculum to whenever having these PDs or workshops. So our hope is, one of the things is, our hope is to be able to have during the PDs, the staff to be able to carry the similar conversations that we had with our empathy interviews, and then be able to model them within the classroom so that the staff can experience the same type of discussion and the same type of vulnerability that the students, they would be asking the students to have as well. And then I can't remember who I'm passing it on to. I think I'm passing it on to, is it Rots? I think it's Rots. Perfect. All right.
Yeah, it's getting passed on to me since we had a presenter that was absent today. So my first one to start off with is offering mental health check-ins with students. So this will be requiring students or school districts to provide mental health check-ins for students so they can express their emotions, their thoughts, their concerns, whether they be positive or negative, at least once a month. And ideally, we would like to also have a continuous open form of contact for students because, once a month doesn't necessarily carry over everyone. Lots of stuff can happen in a month. A student can need support at any time, any day of the week. And we really want to make sure that they're continually lifted up in the ways that they need. Our next is offering mental health breaks for students. So it would be scheduling time throughout the day and year to account for the need to just take a break and rest sometimes. It's been a couple tough years, and school's tough enough on a lot of students to begin with. And we want to make sure that they have an environment that is conducive to learning, that allows them to rest their brain and truly work to be better selves mentally so they can be better selves academically. Then we have providing comprehensive suicide prevention. So we want to make suicide prevention materials and resources available in every single classroom and administrative office. We do not want students to have to go down to a nurse's office or a counselor's office only to be able to receive assistance and awareness for suicide prevention. We want students to be able to access that from a dimensional level. And we also want school districts to partner with the Department of Behavioral Health to implement regularly updated and evidence-based and informed and modern suicide prevention curriculum that is interdisciplinary at least twice a year. We had a student actually from our council that talked about how their school still plays suicide prevention tapes that are on a VHS. Completely obsolete in this time and day. And a lot of students have complained about how the videos from the 90s just don't cut it anymore. And we really need students to feel seen in a modern day and aspect. And then we want to increase support for students with eating disorders. So we want to use a trauma-informed curriculum to be mindful and respectful of students with eating disorders. So avoiding triggering language, making sure in health classes they address eating disorders beyond the scope of anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa. So including things like pica, BED, ARFID, atypical anorexia, lots of other disorders that might be affecting current students. And we want to offer more positive food reinforcement in eating areas, so minimizing caloric broadcasting that might upset students and making sure that they have an environment where they feel safe to eat and do not feel triggered or attacked by anything in a cafeteria or in a classroom. And then I'm passing it on to, I have no clue, to be honest. Heather.
Back to me. This is always my favorite part, to be able to say, can we please give a hand for the student recommendations that they cultivated themselves? Every time, I probably, this is like my 40th version of this presentation, and every time I'm always blown away at how thoughtful and smart and emotionally intelligent their recommendations are. And as I've been working with partners to talk about how we move these forward, it just reinforces that the work that we're doing is important, and I'm just really proud to have been able to be along with them on this path. So what's even cooler is that while they were working on those recommendations, the momentum kind of at the federal level continued as well. So if the lieutenant governor were here, she would be like, we were on the cutting edge of these recommendations. Also, there's an alarm going on in the back of my sound. I'm not sure what it is. I've never heard it before, so I'm not going to go until someone comes to get me. But in February, the CDC actually released their children's mental health as an ongoing public health concern declaration. So, you can see how it was kind of happening at the federal level. It was growing in awareness and recognition. And then a month later, the president actually talked about the mental health crisis in the country in his State of the Union. So, if it gets to the level of the State of the Union, people are starting to really talk about it. It's hopefully starting to be normalized to talk about mental health and how it's okay to not be okay, and we need access to resources. Following the president's State of the Union address, the White House released a fact sheet. The U.S. Department of Health started to talk about a strategy to address mental health, and then the Health and Human Services Agency and the Department of Ed released a joint announcement of an effort that they were going to work on together to ensure expanded access to school-based behavioral health services. So we are excited that we're writing this swell at the same time, because it just validates the concern, or it validates the recommendations that the students were making, because they're also being made at a federal level. So it was just kind of a great opportunity to see that momentum. And when I share the slide deck, all of those documents are hyperlinked in case you want to look at them yourselves. And we're doing some cross mapping on recommendations from all those as well, so that we can start talking about where things are being done in other places to address some of these recommendations. I want to also, as we talk about kind of what's next, and we also have created some space for you all to talk to the students and ask questions and have some dialogue about action items. We want to talk a little bit about kind of where we are today, but I also like to say this is that we as an administration out of the Lieutenant Governor's office have been very happy and honored and proud to be working on this initiative, but we know we are not the experts. Right? We also know that we don't know everything. So in some places, a recommendation might be a recommendation of something that's already happening, but maybe we just need to elevate awareness of it. Or maybe we need to talk to more partners and kind of start crossing boundaries and and cutting across silos to see where innovation can happen and where creativity can happen and where we can leverage flexibility or resources. And as we've gone through and started talking to people, we've learned a lot, even just since we've started having these briefings. And so I'm hopeful that we get to hear from you all if you have ideas and suggestions or additions on the recommendations, or where maybe some things are already happening that we can highlight. So I want to highlight quickly, I know we've talked about HB 44, which was a bill that passed that does give permission to school districts to include mental health as an excused absence for their absentee policies. As you can see, though, that bill just gives permission to school boards, whereas the student's recommendation is students should have 6 mental health days per year. So there's clearly a gap between what we got and what we recommend. So we will continue to work on closing that gap, hopefully. But we'll take a win, right? We're moving the ball down the field, so to speak. So that's a good first step. The other bill that we haven't talked about as much is Senate Bill 102. And that bill is going to require school districts to report up to the Department of Education the number of mental health clinicians they've hired, what their roles are in the schools, what their certification or licensure is, the source of funding for those positions. And while this sounds like a really tedious, annoying bill, what I see this as being is a really good move toward us closing the gap between what the School Safety and Resiliency Act is requiring for access to counselors and mental health support, and how we close that gap, right? So we know we don't have enough access for services for students. And so tracking what we do have will help us see where we are and how far we have to go. And so I am looking forward to seeing that bill get implemented and that report rolling out to, so districts will roll up to KDE. KDE will then report that to the legislature, and we can hopefully start building a case for funding for more mental health clinicians in schools, which gets back to one of our other recommendations. As you can see too, those bills had massive bipartisan support. So we're going to do our best to leverage that support as well. And then in the past few weeks, we've had a series of briefings on these recommendations. We've talked to all of the K groups. We've talked to all of our cooperative partners. We've talked to Friskies. We've talked to anybody who will listen and anybody who will have us. For example, 2 students and I drove to Bowling Green yesterday to talk to the GREC board of directors. And so all the superintendents from that region were there, and we got to give the same presentation. So we are willing to go anywhere we're asked to talk about these recommendations, and I will never not do it with a student. So if you want students there, just let me know. We'll get them in front of you. We're also going on a bit of a road show this summer as well. We're presenting to several conferences here in Kentucky. And more excitingly, we have been invited to present to the Interim Joint Committee on Education of the General Assembly in July. So that will be our best opportunity to educate legislators and lawmakers and policymakers about these recommendations, especially the ones that will require legislative change. And we know that all of these recommendations don't necessarily need legislative change. Some of them are policy changes, some of them are practice changes, some of them are just awareness raising. But for those that will require legislative change, we are trying to build those allies and those relationships at that presentation. And that'll be July 14th. And then this past month has been Mental Health Awareness Month, and on May 12th, we had a big event here at the Capitol. We declared the day Student Mental Health Awareness Day. The governor was there, the lieutenant governor was there, the students presented their recommendations. And what was really cool about that is that that was live streamed from the governor's YouTube channel, where he does his weekly press conferences. And we've had over 800 viewings of that event across probably beyond the state, because it goes everywhere in the internets. But that was exciting for me because we had a great crowd physically in the Capitol, but a really good virtual audience as well. So I know that the word is getting out, and that makes me really excited about this work. So I get to now put the question to you all, and I know Soliana might be really interested in asking this question, because she was like, what is our action? What's our call to action in this presentation? So what we've been doing when we've gone on these presentations and briefings is actually putting the ball in your court and asking you all as an audience, what is your role in helping the students move these recommendations forward? what is something maybe you've already done that resonates with these or converges with their recommendations? What suggestions do you have? What ideas do you have? What feedback do you have? We're collecting all of this as we build our work plan to move forward toward these action items. So I'm going to ask you that question and then also say these students are here to answer questions that you guys might have as well. So I'm actually going to be quiet and I'm going to let you all have a conversation, which is what Heather, I think, really wanted, was for us to have some dialogue here.
Well, I will say, this is, I think, the second time I've heard this presentation, and just every time I hear it, it makes me so excited. Just that, one, that we have the Lieutenant Governor's support when it comes to student mental health and how important that is. And being at that mental health action summit that day was just absolutely incredible because it was all student led. Like, I literally just sat in the corner and let them do their thing. And it was so refreshing to think we've got, like, if we can put the world in these kids' hands, like, we're going to be okay. And it was just really great and refreshing to hear their recommendations, their ideas, their thoughts. But just, one thing I think is exciting for me is, I'm also the president of the Kentucky School Counselor Association. So I had talks with legislators about House Bill 44 and Senate Bill 102, I think is what it is. And so, like, I know our association supported both of those bills, and to know that our students also supported those as well, and those were some of the recommendations that came out of that. I think that was really excellent, and that, again, that it was overwhelming bipartisan. Everybody agreed to that, and I think it's just going to give us some more data, like you said, Heather, especially with House Bill 102, just more data to support the need for funding, which is so key and so important for continued mental health resources. But just thank you to the students. You guys are absolutely amazing. You blow me away, and just thank you for all the work that you've done.
Yeah, I mean, my name is Kate Barron. I love all of that information that was presented, especially because it comes from the mouth of the babes, and for me, one of the parts that has just become pretty sort of overwhelming about being a school counselor lately is just the fact of, I can say these things, the students are saying these things, and like, I would love for you to come to a board meeting in my district with the school counselors and present this. Because sometimes I think what can be frustrating from my perspective in my particular district is that they hire mental health people to come in for a day a week at a school, and they say, we've got mental health, but then they keep throwing on counselors non-counseling related duties. So we absolutely cannot meet the mental health needs and do the proactive stuff that we need to be doing, and having the group-wide conversations or the one-on-one conversations about eating disorders, about suicide prevention, because even in the elementary level, we need that. And that's what I would really love, is I would really love for you guys to come out to my specific district and present this and try and get them on board with it.
I don't want to jump in front of a student if you guys want to respond to that, but I do want to say something. So I'm going to let you guys talk first in case you want to respond. Anyone?
I will say real quick, something that I think we saw from the roundtables that we had was just the variation in the different regions as to which supports were provided. Because I know, some regions like maybe Jefferson County, they have mental health practitioners, but, maybe in Eastern Kentucky, they didn't have any sort of access to a mental health professional. And so seeing that variation as to, what counselors have to do across the state, if if the district does not provide a mental health practitioner, within within their schools, that's something that we definitely looked into, and seeing how we can, I guess, make it universal for mental health professionals to be persistent parts of each and every school. And so, yeah, that was a big thing, especially for me, that I noticed. And, you know, it's something that we prioritize moving forward.
So, Kate, one of the things I would want to make sure you know, and is that especially at the Lieutenant Governor being an educator, we recognize in the recommendations the limitations that they have, right? We are sensitive to adding more things to people's plates. We don't want to do that, right? We want to try to take the things off the plates that shouldn't be on your plate, right? And so we want to be sensitive to that. And I didn't frame that earlier, and I'm going to try to make a note to start doing that better. But like, we want your professional development to not be more. We want it to be appropriate and relevant and necessary. The Lieutenant Governor has a great example of how she, every year, at the midpoint of her career, every year she had taken a bloodborne pathogens training. She had never had a mental health training. Never, right? Every day she dealt with student mental health. She never dealt with a bloodborne pathogen, but she was trained. So we recognize in these recommendations, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of regionality, as Soliana mentioned too. And so wouldn't it be great if this would be an opportunity to review all professional development? That would be an amazing byproduct, but we don't want to add to the plate. We would like to disperse the food across multiple plates.
Definitely. And I am all for that. I mean, I would love, you know, we have to turn in our PD hours every year, and mine is just test training.
Yeah. Right.
Test training and special ed meetings.
Yeah.
And I would love to have more that are related specifically to mental health and what I feel like my job as a school counselor should be. I mean, I don't even care if it's added on top, because that's the stuff that I'm here for. And
Right.
That's what drove me to be a school counselor. But unfortunately, there are just some districts who don't see the value in that.
Yeah. And we hope to be able to use our recognition and understanding of that passion and desire, and hope we can shine a light on that, right? I mean, I really do. I kind of giggle every time I talk about the bloodborne pathogen trainings, but it's such an excellent illustration of the relevancy of professional development, right? And like the necessity of it. I know that's like a federally required training, so I get it, but just it does illustrate the point of never having had a mental health training for something you need every day, but having a training every year for something you've never had to use. So I think, and there is some overlap too between, I think, to Soliana's point, the regionality of implementation too. Like, one of the things that we're learning as we've gone along is how some districts are kind of filling the gap for mental health services, whether it's partnering with a community care, a comp care center, a regional community mental health center, or is it hiring a clinician, and how did they fund it? And I hope that SB 102 will help us understand that as well. Right, Sarah, like your all's recommendation of how do we get to the ratio of 1 to 250 is $93 million, right? So like, who's going to fund $93 million tomorrow? Probably no one. But if that's the end goal, and that's a 5-year goal or a 10-year, whatever it is, what are the creative solutions in the middle to that goal that we can start rolling out or supporting or elevating or highlighting for districts to meet that gap in the middle? Which I think is why the recommendation of the peer support, the peer mentoring, is really important too, because that, like Soleila said, that's not a clinician, but is that an intervention that can help a student along the way. So there's a lot of nuance in the recommendations that we could probably talk about for like the next 5 hours.
And I thought that was such a great recommendation, guys, because I even see it in the elementary level. Like, some of our kids who are a bit of a behavior issue as they're older, they love going to the MSD classroom. They love going to kindergarten or first grade and helping out. And I mean, I can't tell you how many times one of our most infamous 5th graders would turn to a younger student and be like, "You can't be doing that. You're going to turn out," you know? And it really, they thrive on that. they thrive. And I think that is such a great idea, because sometimes the best mental health you can give for yourself, I mean, we all do it as adults, is going over to your friends and just kind of having a session of getting it all off your chest. So I think that's a phenomenal idea.
I have a question for students. First of all, I want to say that I was really impressed with the holistic nature of the recommendations and your presentation, from increasing school culture, check-ins, great, improved trainings. It's just really holistic in nature, and I was just really impressed by that. I wanted to ask, this is kind of in the weeds a little bit, but I wanted to ask, what would a mental health break on a consistent basis in a school day, how do you envision
that? I can take this one. How we have talked about how mental health breaks would work in school is just a consistent set of time that is not used for anything, that's not used for any educational purpose. So like just truly a 10-minute break. This is how I've seen it on a few schools. It's a 10-minute break once or twice a day where there is no like learning going on. You simply are just like relaxing, talking with friends, talking with teachers, whatever. And just to kind of break up the day more in a sense. And also a big part of this is not using it for switching classes. So not using like the 7-minute bell in between classes as your mental health break, but having an actual 10, 15, 20-minute break where you can just relax and there's nothing going on at that time. And anyone else can add on to that.
And probably with access to phones, without access to phones, is that a silly question? Probably would be, right?
I mean, I think that would be up to school policy and whatnot. Mm-hmm. But you know, at my high school, you know, they never really take phones away. But mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I'm loving to hear this. So yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to add on. This is something that I mentioned at our meeting a couple days ago, but I think the idea of a break can really be embedded in several ways, or a variety of ways that come to mind. And so one way that Sam mentioned, I mean, I am all for, but another thing that I think, especially depending on the age level and whatnot, that I think has been really beneficial for me is at the beginning of each of my AP Lane classes, we would spend 10 minutes just to talk about something that we are excited for or something that we wanted to share. So I told people at the meeting 2 days ago, that like I was really excited one day. Like I loved the 10-minute talks before our class, because one day I was really excited to share with my class that I had bought my first like set of tires for my car. And so it's stuff like that where we get to like actually over time, this kind of falls into the enhancing school culture and climate as well. But over time, that's an opportunity to be able to build relationships and create rapport. And that is a time where we didn't necessarily get on our phones. It was just getting to listen and share. And so it's moments like that can be really valuable as well. And maybe they may not be considered a mental health break for everyone, but it was definitely one for me.
Yeah, and also something to add on to that, something my school did for Mental Health Awareness Month was that we had these kind of like meetings, like 30-minute meetings before and after school, where we had just kind of like a round table where we all sat in a circle and we had all our counselors there and our mental health practitioner, and we all just checked in with each other and had like a grounding. We did like all these different exercises, and we really just had a grounding moment where we were present with each other and we were able to focus on ourselves and our livelihoods before we enter school and like right after we exited the school. And I think this is something we can definitely integrate into the school schedule if you have buses that are able to accommodate those times, maybe busing students, respecting that meeting, but that was something that we also did, was we want students to come into the school healthy and we want them to leave out the school healthy as well.
Would you envision that an ongoing and consistent type of meeting, or was that kind of like a for Mental Health Awareness Month, that's once a year you do that kind of thing.
We did it for Mental Health Awareness Month, but I can envision it as something that is daily. And maybe, you have counselors rotating, doing it, on, different days of the week, or, it's definitely doable. And I think that's something it's heavily beneficial. So I think it's possible to do it daily.
Okay, does anybody else have any other questions? Okay. Okay, well, I don't think we have any other questions. But I cannot thank you all enough for coming today. I know when I've seen all this, I know I was very impressed, and I know I was excited just coming out of the schools. It is very exciting, especially because it's student driven. And just like Kate said, as school counselors, we always say this: we want this, and we've been wanting this. And I really like that the administration is coming into this, where you're training the administrators, you're going to train the legislators, just to let them know what you all need statewide, because I think that's going to be where things are going to get changed the most, because ultimately they decide what counselors do in their buildings and their districts. And so I know we are advocating for it. I know at the State Department, and I know everybody on this call is advocating. So I really appreciate that you all being here and sharing your recommendations with us. And yeah, so very, very impressive. So
I will put my email address in the chat, Heather, for anyone who wants to reach out, and I will send you the slide deck. I will ask if you all know a venue in which we should make this presentation. Like Kate, if we could make it work to come to your school board, let's try to figure it out. I think we want to get in front of who you think is the most important to make these recommendations move forward. If you feel that's school administrators, if you feel that's school boards, if you feel that's, whatever group you think it might be, send me your ideas. Oh my gosh. And your recommendations. We'll do our best to get there. 14 students. I mean, these 4 are actually all seniors and going on to do things, but I still have other students who will be able to engage in the work, and I don't think they're going to abandon us anytime soon. I told them they couldn't leave this group, even though they're graduating. And we're building out a few more students as well who can start talking about this. So, we'll go where we can, when we can. So just let us know.
Okay. All right. Okay, well, thank you very much, and good luck to all of you on your futures, and enjoy your summer like we talked about. Make sure you shut down and take breaks. Yeah, practice that mindfulness. So, okay, well, thank you, Heather, again for helping and being on here today. I really appreciate it. So we'll be in touch.
Thank you. Thanks, students, too.
All right.
Heather, I think you're muted.
Sorry, my headphones. So next we have Dr. Florence Chang. She's from the Kentucky Department of Education since March. Right, Florence, I think? Yes. But she is just going to share for a few minutes just about moving forward over the next year. I know you've heard the equity dashboard, and because I know I've been mentioning it in some of my trainings, and of course, from Dr. Sweeney and our team. And so we just want to start kind of getting it out there, some ideas of how it can be used within counseling programs, to start driving some of your data and your conversations, and how it might be a one-stop shop essentially versus having all this data everywhere. And so she's just going to share a little bit about some ideas moving forward. And actually, she and Dr. Fields will be presenting at our statewide cadre in December to go a lot more in depth with just some of the things she'll share today. So, and Florence, I will share my screen again so that way everybody can see your amazing slides.
Thank you. And there are a lot of slides, so I won't necessarily read through every single one because I know we still have a lot of important topics to cover. What I will start with is just this idea that I love that I learned from Chicago. So Chicago Public Schools has a very strong research consortium, and they have studied and studied what works when you talk about using data. And one of the important practices they talk about is using the right level of data at the right time with the right people. And I constantly think about that every time we are talking about data. What level of data do we need to be looking at? What teams need to be looking at, and how often? And I think the previous presentation is a great example of, you got student voice information that they're collecting, who needs to hear it, the legislators, and then when did they hear it, to be able to make decisions on those bills. So we're going to talk about this, or I'm going to briefly discuss this in the framework of the equity dashboard, because you all have heard a little bit about it, and we just wanted to make sure you had some resources as you finish up the year to jump into it if you have time at the end of the year, or think about it for next year. But it's a reminder that this is a relatively new tool that you all have access to, or should have access to, and it is to help you look at the inequities across different areas within your school. It is a big picture, and it is something that can be hard to calculate on your own. So it's something that KDE has provided. Next slide. So how to get to it. If you haven't tried to get to it, the first thing I would do is go into Infinite Campus. Right under your name on the left side, there is a line called Tableau Visualizations. And if you have access to it, you just click on it, and then it will take you follow that pathway right there, go to Explore and Student Equity Dashboard. If you don't see it, contact your district's Infinite Campus administrator, and they can get you access. It is a local decision as to who should have access, but the guidance that KDE has provided is that this is for leadership within schools. So counselors are absolutely part of that, and we recommend that all counselors have access to this. So it uses something called risk ratios to examine the equity of outcomes between different student groups. And it's color coded, so it's super easy. But when you see inequities, the equity dashboard will highlight that for you in a very easy to process visual. So we'll go on to the next slide. And what it actually does is it compares the likelihood of something happening given the demographics of your school. So we know everybody's demographics are different. You have different numbers of kids in different groups, and it basically controls for that. So it's looking at if you have a group of, say, 30 students who are Asian, for example, and then 200 that are white. It'll look at the proportion of students within each of those groups. And so it's not calculating as a whole, it's calculating based on your numbers, and it's live. So it's based on the most current data available, which in this case would be your last day of school. Okay. So overrepresentation, when it's identified, it means that students have been identified for something that is seen as kind of a negative variable, possibly. So something like chronic absenteeism, or out of school suspensions, in school suspensions, or overly identified for possibly special education. Those are areas where you might see more kids identified. If you see that, that is something that we would see as a definition of overrepresentation. Underrepresentation means that kids are in a certain group are being under-identified or have less access to something in one of these areas. So we look at gifted and talented programming, or identification, access to advanced coursework and dual credit, CTE for high school, CTE completers, career tech, and then your benchmark assessments, so state assessments. And we compare these different groups. So these are the groups you can think about your own school right now. What are the major groups and minority groups in your context? What it will do is it will compare that particular group against everyone not in that group. So if you see, for example, white students, they will be compared to all non-white students. If you see homeless, they will be compared to all non-homeless students to decide if they are at risk. Next slide. So this is just an example, as a screenshot of what it might look like. So you'll see a series of dots when you get into this. A blue dot means they are not at risk. An orange dot is an indicator that is a group that is possibly at risk for over or under representation. So it really is something easy. I've had to calculate this before by hand, and it is quite cumbersome. So to have this at your fingertips is really powerful. And if you hover over the dot, it'll actually go through the numbers with you, so you can actually see, if you're a numbers person, to see how was it calculated. Okay, so I just want to wrap up by just giving you all, again, this tip about the right data at the right time. And so when you start thinking about coming back into school next year, and all the different committees that you all serve on, as well as your peers and all the leadership teams and committees that exist that meet all the time, I always encourage, one of the things that research finds and Chicago found was that you want to think about calendaring out the exact data and reports that you need at which time. And so this is just an example of how the equity dashboard might be used. So for example, your special education identification, that might be something you want to go ahead and take a look at now to see which groups might be over-identified for special education to start planning. Something like that could help. Think about your system. So Los Angeles, for example, they did something similar to this, and they found, when they went into their root causes, that there was an issue with their pre-referral system. And so they enhanced their family communication to address that. So, but they didn't know that till they had the data. So you want to kind of think about, what's the rhythm of when you would look at this data? You definitely don't want to look at this data every single day. You want to look at this data at specific time points to drive action. So going back to what the kids said, it is student-driven, practice-driven, action-driven. So chronic absenteeism might be looked at monthly, out of school and in-school suspension might be looked at monthly just for certain teams. And then you go on to the next slide. The other indicators on here: gifted and talented, advanced coursework and access. That might be more like 3 times a year, because you're looking at setting up scheduling and access to certain courses. So again, not something you look at every year, but when you're setting up your system, that's when you would take a look at this data just to see where are possible inequity points to think about and address. And then your benchmark assessments, that only comes out once a year. So you'd only be doing that once a year, not daily or monthly. And so here are some resources that we are providing just to remind you what could go with these different rhythms. And so your data analysis protocol is probably the one to think about. As you think about calendaring out your system, I would recommend then partnering that with your data analysis protocol. Heather, if you could just click on that quickly, we'll just show them. If you haven't seen it, it is something that is so helpful. So now you have the rhythm, right? Of, okay, we're going to look at the data. And how are we going to discuss the data? So this is where you start looking at this 4-step process of identifying the problem as step 1. And then step 2 is looking at your root causes. That's where your students come in. That's where you talk to kids. You gather more data, because a dot, there's so many stories right behind that dot that you need to kind of, sometimes you think you know and you don't. When you talk to kids, they illuminate. I mean, that VHS tape thing is like, blows your mind. Like, I would never have thought of that, but they pointed that out. Totally, something that they notice right away, that this is going to disconnect, keep distance when they see that mode of delivery. So talking to kids can help with step 2, that identifying root causes. And then planning and implementation. This is talking about what you're actually doing, the implementation of what you're doing. And then step 4 is your evaluation piece. How are we going to evaluate what we're doing? This is a great piece to come back at the end of the year. So again, thinking about your rhythm of how you would use this document. You would be thinking, using it all along the way, but certain ones are more important. So evaluation obviously would come at a midpoint, like, okay, at the midpoint, we made these changes. How do we see improvements in the equity dashboard? And then at the end of the year would be another good time. So I'm happy to discuss this further with you all. I know we've got a lot still to cover on the agenda, so I just wanted to make sure you all saw this, and I hope that you found this helpful. And then we put a couple of ASCO resources in there too, so you can see, how this can partner. This information can help you feed some of the resources you may already be using. So, Heather, do we have time for questions? I don't know. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer any.
Yeah, we can take a couple of minutes, and then I'll finish us up. Does anybody have questions for Florence?
I don't have a question, but I will say I'm a data nerd a little bit, so that's kind of exciting to me too, to see that the protocol that looks like something that would fit well with what we're doing with MTSS as the counselor roles and such. Just having those guidance documents to go along with. It relates to a conversation I had yesterday with my principal, about equity in my school, so that I'm glad to see that as something we can explore.
Mm-hmm. And I forgot one little tip to add. You just triggered me thinking about one little tip to add when you're doing like agendas for meetings, is you lay out, your calendar of when you think you're going to look at data, who's going to look at it, and then add a third column, which is purpose. Why are you looking at this data? So, and in the fall, a lot of that will be for school improvement planning, because that's when your schools are doing their school improvement plans. And so you just want to lay out the specific purpose. And then, of course, the other months that you're not looking at the equity dashboard, that's when you're looking at students, hopefully looking at a lot of student level data and collecting that student voice. So this is just an example of where equity dashboard would fit in, but of course, we're always overrun with data. So you just want to make sure you calendar out when's the right time to look at what level. So hopefully that helps. I will say it is research-based, and it has helped a lot of schools, stay on track for their improvements.
Yep. All right. Thank you, Florence. Yeah, and like I said, throughout the next school year, I know Dr. Chang and Dr. Fields, we're going to be training and offering, professional developments, coaching, different opportunities for districts, regional co-ops, because again, I think this is going to help a lot of counselors drive their data and their programs, and of course, to be collaborative within the MTSS teams and the administrative teams and with their CSIPs and their CDIPs. So I think this is going to be hopefully almost like a one-stop shop for data versus having to see 7 different reports or 7 different sources, where it's just, it is overwhelming. So we are going to dive into this a lot more in the upcoming school year, but we wanted you all to see this kind of first as more of a little bit of an overview today. So. Okay. All right. Well, we'll finish up. I just have a few items that I'm quickly going to go through, and I've shared these slides with you all in the chat. So that way, if it goes too fast, you can always revisit because I know there's some things on here for sure that you need to know. So June 10th is our last statewide cadre. All the regional cooperatives are taking registration. So if you've not heard of anything, let me know. I had a few reach out to me this week. They didn't know who their co-ops were, so we want to make sure that they get to join us. But it's gonna kind of be a time of just celebration, and we're gonna watch the movie Angst that focuses on anxiety from different perspectives, and then it has some different things you can do with your students and your staff that have symptoms of anxiety. And so I've got to watch it, and it is amazing. It made you think about it in some different perspectives, especially for students. And then we are going to focus on some proactive planning for the upcoming school year. We are going to walk through the annual administrator conference and agreement, which moving into next school year, that is a huge proactive form and conference to have before the school year starts. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to show actually what Florence just showed about the school data summary, just a snippet of that as we end the school year. Now that you have your data, what moving forward can you use to start planning your program? And again, we're starting small. We're not going to be overwhelmed with 5 different things, and it's going to be very small. We're going to baby step it. So that's what's coming up on June 10th. And then a lot of you all responded to offer to do a quick webinar for some of the different topics for our KDE website. So these are a few topics that are still not claimed. And I know some of you offered to do a couple videos. So if you haven't responded yet, these are the topics that are still kind of waiting for someone to claim them. And again, the purpose of this is it will be offered statewide. So it'll be on the website. So anybody can jump on, and they're going to see your webinar as a quick just teaching guide of how to do goals, how to do small group results and reports based on some of the ASCA templates. Because, of course, we are doing trainings and coaching around the state. But as we do trainings, we want people to have kind of a go-to guide of a quick video to remind them of what maybe a template should look like or best practices. And of course, you're the advisory council, so you are the experts on all of these things. So I'll be sending out another email in the next week just to see if anybody else wants to claim another topic. And then for those who have offered to do videos, I'll kind of give you just some talking points, and then we'll talk about specifically kind of what you're thinking you would like to discuss, and then we'll start creating the videos. We would like to get them up by August into September because I don't want to overwhelm you over the summer by creating a video. So I'll send out a little bit more information about that. So that'll be coming out in an email. And then just as a heads up, Senate Bill 8 has updated their legislation. So the use of time you submitted last year, that form is updated for the school counselors to include an actual description of appropriate and inappropriate activities, and also what true direct services look like, what indirect services look like based on the legislation. So that form is going to be similar to last year, but it's just updated. It's got a little bit more information just to help our districts make sure that you are reporting the correct use of time in the different categories. Because last year it kind of got a little bit gray. And our data was a little bit hard to just look at. And so it's also going to add mental health service providers. So when you see this come out after July 14th, there is a Google form option or a spreadsheet option for our larger districts. But every mental health service provider now has to provide different information of what they're doing in our schools. That includes social workers, community-based therapists that are hired by the districts. It includes just any other mental health provider that might be in a school setting. But they are going to provide the services they offer. They're going to estimate about how much time they're given to different services. Again, just to see what are our kids getting, the access to them. So that's going to be coming out. And a fax document is also coming out. We've seen a lot of our administrators and our central office staff, they kind of struggle with, kind of the why behind the use of time reporting, and what are some some next steps that if your use of time is not maybe what it should be, then how can we help support that? And then what are some next steps to start bridging that gap between your inappropriate activities to shift them over to more appropriate activities? So that's going to be coming. And then, of course, starting in the fall, and actually some are starting now, we are training administrators, central office staff, superintendents, anybody who may have any kind of hand in any of the use of time reporting, because we want to advocate for counselors, but we also want to make sure they understand what are the uses of time and why. Because we've seen some school counselors are scared to report their use of time just because they may be questioned about what they're doing daily, even though they're the ones assigning them what they're doing daily. So we want to make sure they understand this is not a KDE's going to come down and kind of smack your hand type thing. It's for support, and it's for growth, and it's for advocacy for our counselors. And of course, just like we heard from our students, they need more access to counselors and mental health providers. So we are training administrators and central office staff. We have several schedules starting from August all the way through November at all the regional co-ops and then some districts. So just some quick updates. The social emotional learning framework is getting finalized for the framework piece. So hopefully that's going to come out in the next couple of months with that group. I know some of you are on that. The Iop Committee, we have made a lot of progress with only 4 meetings. The group I have, they are working hard to provide our state with updated resources and links, and just build upon what we already have. We're going to have an elementary playbook as well. And then we're going to have a potential timeline if districts want to reference that. They don't have to, though, of course. But we're hoping that that work will be hopefully coming out by September. So that way you all can have that moving forward to start your school year as you all look at ILP implementation. And then the Calming Space Grant, it ended yesterday. So I know we are looking to move through that process, and winners will be announced, I think, by June 15th. And of course, it's, 1 per region. So I know I'm excited for that to come out for those pilot schools. And then for your schools and districts, I would love to come just visit your school, visit your district, not necessarily a training, but just to come observe and just to see what you're doing, because I know you all are doing phenomenal things in your buildings, and I want to showcase that in my newsletter. I know when I'm traveling around, I shout out everybody I'm going to see, whether it's, Kenwood Elementary from JCPS or it's Christian County. They've got some initiatives of removing inappropriate activities from counselors starting next year. So if there's ever a time starting next school year, you would let me come visit, just hang out, and of course just be with kids. I would love to come visit for any reason, just to come hang out with you. These are the topics for next year's statewide cadres and the day-long summit. So in October, Carolyn Stone is going to be here virtually, of course, talking about the legal and ethical best practices for school counselors. And she's amazing. I got to hear her speak last week through our statewide coordinators meeting. ASCA, if you don't know, they've just updated their ethical standards. So it's on their website. It has a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging in there now, which is amazing. So just for you all to have an update, there is a new document they just released. December 6th, like I said, Dr. Fields and Dr. Chang will be going a lot deeper into some of the data-driven practices that she touched on today. And then we'll connect that to our Kentucky framework for best practices that I know you've seen. And then February 7th, we are having the school counselors for MTSS group join us. And of course, it won't be as long of a day. It won't be the 9 to 5 like it was last year, 9 to 4. But we have, I think, 3 of their presenters that are going to come and just focus on MTSS and how counselors fit into that Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. They're going to show some different types of data. It's also going to include some suicide prevention and within that. So that's going to be exciting to have all day. And then June 6th is still kind of open in the air. So But just for your calendars, that's what's going to happen next year. And then just, and I know we don't have time to even get into it, but just as you look at your slides, just if you need any support with just taking care of your staff, because I know people are going to come to you about the whole self-care conversation. What should we be doing for our staff, for our students? So please reach out if you need anything with that, ideas, resources, because I know self-care is almost so generalized now. It has to be so specific. And what does that truly look like for our staff, for our students, and especially for yourself? Make sure, you're going to be the one they all come to, but you have to take care of yourself first. So please make sure that you have your own mental maintenance. I saw that word the other day and I was like, I kind of like that. So again, just reach out if you need anything moving proactively in the next school year, because you all know come August, we are going to have a lot of the similar issues and mental health needs for our kids and our staff, and for you all as well. So we want to make sure that we are supporting and helping you with whatever you need. Are there any questions or concerns from the group before we are finished for today? Okay, and I'm sorry I kept you over a couple minutes. Those are our meetings as of right now for next year for our advisory council. So if you want to go ahead and just tentatively hold those dates, and I'll be sending out invites very soon. So that way you all can join us, because you are vital to this work. And of course, a lot of you will be on videos on the KDE site very soon, which is exciting. I want to make sure we showcase you all as our experts for our state. Okay, well, if nobody has anything else, I really appreciate you joining us in June in the summer. A lot of you may not be working, but just continue to reach out over the summer. If you need anything for support, for trainings, for coaching, questions, concerns, please reach out, and then I'll be happy to help and support. So, all right. Well, thank you very much. And you all enjoy your summer. Take your mental maintenance, self-care time. Make sure you have that shutdown time. Okay. Okay. And I will see you all soon. All right.